The whole room went quiet the moment he crossed it. Not loud quiet, not dramatic quiet. The kind that moves through a crowd like a slow current. A pause between conversations. A glance held a beat too long, a drink raised but not yet sipped. Most people in the Whitfield Elementary gymnasium that Friday evening wouldn't have been able to say exactly when they noticed it happening. But they noticed. Walter Crane noticed it first. He'd been standing near the folding table at the far end of the room, the one stacked with silent auction bids and laminated bid sheets, pretending to read a description of a weekend at a Muskoka cottage he had no intention of bidding on. The gymnasium had been transformed for the night. String lights along the ceiling joists, round tables covered in white paper tablecloths, a photo wall near the entrance with a sign that read Whitfield School Community Gala. Together we build. There was a bar staffed by a volunteer from the Parents Association, and a catering table with mini quitches, and something involving phyllo pastry that people kept walking past without touching. Walter had arrived alone. He usually did. He was 53, broad-shouldered in a way that clothes often argued with close-cut gray at his temples and hands that looked more accustomed to work than to cocktail glasses. He'd come in his good jacket. The navy one Emma had told him made him look presentable, back before Emma had moved to Halifax with her husband and their new baby. He'd worn it tonight because it was the kind of event where you wore your good jacket, even if you weren't entirely sure why you were there in the first place. His daughter Charlotte was in grade 4. That was why he was there. He held his club soda and watched the room with the quiet attention of someone who had spent a long time learning how to read spaces. The Whitfield Parents Association had a certain texture to it. The same group of families had organized these events for years, and it showed. There were clusters of people who moved through the evening with the ease of people who belonged, who knew which conversations to join and which to drift past, who laughed at the right moments and touched each other's arms and refilled each other's glasses without asking. Walter had been coming to these events for 4 years. He still stood near the auction table. It wasn't that people were unkind to him. A few of the fathers said hello, nodded, asked about Charlotte. One of them, Robert something, whose son played on the same soccer team, had once stopped to talk to Walter for 20 minutes about the Leafs before being pulled away by his wife. That was the longest conversation Walter had had at one of these events. He'd driven home afterward feeling something he didn't have an exact word for. He watched the room. He was good at watching. That was when he saw her. She was standing near the emergency exit on the east wall, slightly behind a decorative pillar wrapped in fairy lights, holding a paper cup of what looked like white wine. She was somewhere in her early 40s, he guessed, dark hair pulled back, a gray-green blazer that looked like it had been chosen carefully, a slight tension in her jaw that she was doing a reasonable job of hiding. She wasn't looking at her phone, which is what people usually did when they were alone at parties and didn't want it to show. She was just standing there, watching the room the same way Walter was watching it, from the outside of something she couldn't quite get into. What struck him was this. She wasn't new. He'd seen her before. Parent-teacher night in October. The winter concert in December, standing near the back. She'd sat 2 rows ahead of him at the spring assembly, and he'd noticed her then because she'd laughed, really laughed, unguarded, when the grade 2s had gotten confused about the order of their song, and the music teacher had gone very still in the way that teachers do. She had a kid here. She came to things. She was not a stranger to this room, and yet tonight she was standing behind a pillar, alone, and the 10 or 12 people nearest to her had not once turned to include her in anything. Walter set his club soda down on the auction table. He thought about it for a moment. He thought about Charlotte, who had told him this morning, very seriously, that there was a girl in her class named Ava who ate lunch alone sometimes, and that Charlotte had decided to sit with her. Because she looked like she needed it, Dad. Charlotte was 9 years old. Walter picked his club soda back up and walked across the room. He didn't plan what he was going to say. He never did. He'd found over the years that planning conversations in advance only made them worse. You ended up trying to execute the plan instead of paying attention to the actual person in front of you. He stopped a couple of feet away from her, close enough to be clearly intending to speak, far enough not to intrude. I keep almost bidding on the Muskoka cottage, he said, and then I remember I don't really like Muskoka. She looked at him. Just for a second he caught something behind her eyes, a flicker of surprise, or maybe just the adjustment a person makes when they've been standing alone long enough that they've forgotten they're visible. "The description says it has a kayak," she said. "I can't kayak. Neither can I." She paused. "I always think I could learn, though. That's probably the whole marketing strategy." She smiled. It was a real smile, not the polished social kind. "Renata Osei," she said, and held out her hand. "Walter Crane." They shook hands with the slight formality of people who were both a little out of practice with this sort of thing. "Your daughter's in Ms. Tremblay's class," she said. "The one with the red backpack. She helped Ava pick up her markers last week when they spilled everywhere." Walter felt something settle in his chest. "Charlotte," he said. "Yeah, she mentioned Ava." Renata nodded. There was something careful about the way she was holding herself, he thought. Not cold, not unfriendly, but guarded in the specific way of someone who had been burned by assuming that warmth was reciprocal. "You come to everything," he said. "Not a question. I've seen you at the assemblies. I try to." She glanced toward the center of the room, then back. "Ava worries when I don't show up. She's 8, but she checks. Charlotte does the same. I left early from the winter concert last year. Work thing. And she still mentions it. They remember everything, everything. Selectively." Renata laughed, and it was the same laugh he'd noticed in December, unguarded, genuine, landing and then retreating back behind her composure, like a wave pulling back from shore. 20 minutes passed without Walter noticing. He noticed when Patricia Holbrook walked by. Patricia, who chaired the Parents' Association, and who had 3 times stopped conversations to introduce a newcomer to the room, who had that particular gift of knowing where the social temperature was dropping and warming it back up. He noticed when Patricia walked by, looked directly at Renata and kept walking, not rudely, not with anything that could be named or pointed to, just past. He watched Renata's face. She hadn't expected anything else. That was the part that stayed with him. He thought about asking. He almost didn't because it felt like pushing into something that wasn't his to push into. But there was something about the way she'd positioned herself behind that pillar. Something about the way she was here, at every event, trying and still standing alone at the end of a room where she'd been coming for. How long? Years, maybe. He didn't know her story. He knew almost nothing about her. "I have to ask you something," he said. She looked at him with the steady expression of someone who was used to deciding in a split second whether to answer a question honestly or not. "Okay, this room. Has it always been like this for you, or is it new?" Renata was quiet for a moment. She looked at the paper cup in her hand. Then she said 3 years. Walter didn't say anything. He let that sit. "My ex-husband," she said finally, "is on the school board." He understood immediately. Not the specifics, not the machinery of it, the who knew what and who told who, and which version of events had become the version that circulated at Parents' Association meetings and end-of-year barbecues, but the shape of it. He understood the shape of it completely. "Dennis Osei," he said. Renata looked at him sharply. "You know him?" "I know of him. He was on the board when they did the rezoning that cut our walking path. He spoke at the meeting." Walter paused. "He was very good at speaking at meetings." "Yes," Renata said quietly. "He was." There was no bitterness in it. That was the thing. There was no performance of bitterness, no edge meant to invite sympathy. She said it the way you said something that had been true for a long time and that you'd gotten tired of carrying the weight of. "So when it ended," Walter said. "When it ended," she said, "people had to choose. And most people," she stopped. Started again. "Most people find it easier to stay in the room they're already standing in." Walter looked across the gymnasium, the clusters, the easy laughter, the arm touching and glass refilling. He thought about how long a person could stand on the outside of that, still showing up, still trying, because her daughter needed to see her show up. Because Ava checked. "How's she doing?" he asked. "Ava." Renata's expression shifted into something softer and more complicated than anything she'd shown him yet. "She's good. She's really good, actually. She made the junior choir. She came home last Tuesday and sang the whole warm-up for me in the kitchen while I was making pasta. Charlotte told me about the choir auditions. She said the auditions were too stressful and that she'd rather do things that weren't competitive." "What does she do instead?" "Currently, she's attempting to build a birdhouse. She found a YouTube video and has been very confident about it for 2 weeks. Has any of it come together? It has 4 walls and no roof, and she's calling it Phase 1. Renata laughed again. This time she didn't pull it back. By 9 o'clock, the silent auction was closing. The catering table had been largely abandoned except for the untouched phyllo pastry, and the gymnasium had thinned into the smaller group that always stayed too long at these things. The association chairs, the couples who'd found someone to talk to, the few parents who were simply in no hurry to go home. Walter had gone to get Renata a fresh drink from the bar. She'd switched to sparkling water, same as him, and when he came back, he found that Patricia Holbrook had stopped near where Renata was standing. He slowed down. Patricia was saying something to Renata in a low voice. Renata was listening with her arms slightly crossed, the guarded posture back. As Walter got closer, he caught the end of it. Just easier for everyone if, and then she saw Walter and stopped. He handed Renata her water. He looked at Patricia with the calm, direct attention that his own employees, back at Crane Engineering, had learned to recognize as the expression that preceded the most important thing Walter Crane was going to say. "Patricia," he said, "how's the auction doing?" Patricia smiled, slightly unsettled. "Very well. The cottage went for 800. Great, he didn't fill the silence that followed with anything. Patricia, after a moment, said goodnight and moved on. Renata looked at him. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. You don't know what she was saying." "No," he agreed, "but I know the tone." He paused. "I've been in enough rooms." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What kind of rooms?" He thought about how to answer that. He thought about the boardrooms, the arbitration hearings, the one February afternoon in a Vancouver conference room, where he'd sat across a table from people who had assumed, for 45 minutes, that he was someone's assistant before the contracts had been placed in front of him for his signature. He'd signed them without comment. He'd never felt the need to announce himself. "The kind where people make assumptions," he said, "and you have to decide whether to correct them or just outlast them." Renata studied him with careful eyes. "Which do you usually do?" "Outlast," he said, "though I've been known to correct." They were among the last to leave. Renata got her coat from the rack near the entrance. Walter held it for her without thinking about it. An automatic courtesy, the kind his mother had made unremarkable, and she slipped into it with a slight, surprised pause that she recovered from quickly. Outside, the April night was cold in the specific Canadian way that refuses to acknowledge that spring has technically started. A leftover chill, the smell of old snow somewheres not far off, the parking lot lit by the orange glow of the school's exterior lights. Their cars turned out to be parked 3 spots apart. "That was the first time in a while," Renata said, "that I didn't spend the whole evening calculating when it would be acceptable to leave." Walter looked at her. "Same." She smiled, not the small social smile, and not the unguarded one either, but something in between, something quieter. "Charlotte's lucky," she said, "to have a dad who shows up. So is Ava," he said. Renata clicked her key fob. The lights of a silver Subaru flashed twice. She stood with one hand on the door. "I should." "Yeah," he paused. "Renata." She looked at him. "The spring fair is in 3 weeks," he said. "Charlotte has apparently signed up to help run a fishing booth, which will go exactly as well as you'd expect. But if you and Ava are going to be there..." "We'll be there," she said. He nodded once. "Then I'll find you near the fishing booth." She got into her car. He walked to his. He didn't look back, because he wasn't the kind of person who looked back to see if someone was watching. He drove out of the parking lot and onto Fairway Drive, and then onto the long, straight stretch of Deerfield Road, and the night was quiet, and the radio was off, and the fields on either side of the road were dark. He thought about a woman standing behind a pillar, watching a room she'd been showing up for 3 years. He thought about his daughter's voice that morning. "Because she looked like she needed it, Dad." He thought about Phase 1 of the birdhouse, waiting on the workbench in the garage, 4 walls and no roof. There was time. 3 weeks later, the spring fair filled the schoolyard with folding tables and hand-painted signs, and the specific organized chaos of 100 kids who had been promised prizes. Charlotte was stationed at the fishing booth, which consisted of a cardboard divider, a wooden dowel with string, and a volunteer behind the divider who attached prizes to the hook. And she was taking her responsibilities with the seriousness she brought to all projects that she had personally chosen. Walter arrived at 9:15 and found Charlotte in a slight conflict with another volunteer about the correct distance between the booth and the next table. "Dad," Charlotte said. Tell Marcus that 2 feet is not enough clearance. It's fine, Marcus said. Phase 1 thinking, Walter said. Charlotte pointed at him. Exactly. He stayed out of it and looked across the schoolyard. He spotted them by the plant sale table. Ava with a small pot of something in her hands, turning it over with the expression of a person making a very serious decision, and Renata standing behind her, hands in the pockets of her jacket, watching her daughter with the quiet, particular attention of a parent who knows exactly which decisions require guidance and which ones need to be made alone. Renata looked up. Across the whole length of the schoolyard, past the balloon station and the bake sale and the ring toss, she found him immediately. She raised a hand. Not a wave exactly, just a recognition. I see you. He raised his back. Charlotte appeared at his elbow. Who's that? Ava's mom. Oh, Charlotte considered. She always looks a little lonely. Walter looked at his daughter for a moment. 9 years old, and she saw it too. Not always, he said. He walked across the schoolyard toward them, past the balloon station and the bake sale and the ring toss, through the particular bright noise of a Friday morning in late April when school is almost done and summer is close enough to almost touch, and the sun was out, proper spring sun now, the kind that had actual warmth in it, and somewhere behind him he could hear Charlotte explaining to Marcus with great patience the structural concept of adequate clearance. Ava held up the pot when she saw him coming. It's a tomato, she said. Early in the season, Walter said. I know, Ava said, entirely unbothered by this. I'm going to build it up slowly. Renata looked at him. There was something in her expression that was different from 3 weeks ago. Less guarded, something settled, the way a room feels after a window has been opened and the air has moved through it. You found us, said I would, he said. They stood there in the April sun, the 4 of them. 2 kids with their separate serious projects, 2 adults with their separate quiet histories. And the spring fair moved around them the way things move when you've stopped watching the edges of the room and started standing, simply, in the middle of it.